Today, we will hear remarks from Senator-elect Gabaldón and Representative Dunn, and we'll do a little bit of Q&A. We're going to cover an election update. We're going to discuss policy priorities of some various conservation organizations for the calendar year 2021. And we're going to talk about ways that you can advocate in the legislative process without ever leaving the comfort of your home. Next slide. All right, so with that, we're going to jump into our first set of remarks from Senator-elect Gabaldón, who prior to her recent election to the state Senate was the ranking or most senior Democrat on the House Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. She was a member of the Drought Contingency Plan Steering Committee, which helped formulate the plan for the state of Arizona to use less Colorado River water. We're so glad you've joined us and look forward to you sharing some thoughts on what you see coming for water and natural resources related legislation this upcoming session, plus any insight you have into effective advocacy from concerned community members. So with that, Senator-elect Gabaldón, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Haley. I really appreciate it. Okay, I'm sorry, can you hear me clearly? Thanks. Good afternoon. What an honor it is to address you today. I'm Rosanna Gabaldón, and I moved to Arizona in 1973. I've witnessed many changes in our state in the past years. I'm proud to see that the Audubon community be engaged and prepared for the next legislative session. Currently, as Haley mentioned, I'm moving from the House to the Senate, and at the House, I was the ranking member of the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. Throughout my 8 years at the House of Representatives, I'm most proud of my work with the Drought Contingency Plan. The governor signed and addressed water sustainability, and the Arizona Reconsultation Committee, which addresses the state's conservation management plans. Water sustainability is one of the most essential issues that Arizona is facing. Water policy is complex and it affects everything in our lives. We must all come together, Republicans and Democrats, and find a long-term solution to Arizona's water needs. We have a great history of making smart, bipartisan water policy, and our future depends on it. The current water policy is based on the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. There is a growing debate on member support for limited or modest water reporting in specific areas. All members agree that water is an important and complicated issue and made more urgent as an ongoing drought worsens. It is critical to make our citizens aware of the impact of the drought and the value of contingency planning for water sustainability. With the challenges facing Arizona, it is essential to focus on legislation that affects our environment carefully. It is up to us to make sustainability happen. In the last 2 years, I've recognized the Arizona water professionals industry to recognize our role in clean and sustainable water supplies, draw attention to career opportunities in the water industry, and increase awareness of Arizona's unique water resources. Thousands of professionals work in water-related fields in Arizona. Focus on your goal to help provide significant conservation efforts that lead to measurable improvement for birds and our wildlife. I was asked to give you my best advice on how to be effective in legislative outreach. One definition of luck is when preparation meets opportunity. It is terrific to see luck happen. The preparation and opportunity coming together were not there by accident. Sometimes we can succeed and make luck happen. Stay focused. Support and advocate for 2 or 3 pieces of legislation. Teach your membership why these efforts are important. Don't be discouraged. Your input will matter. The Audubon has members throughout the state, and I encourage you to have your membership reach out to their legislators. Please get to know them and allow them to know you. Your goal is to build a relationship. When you meet with the legislator, follow these simple guidelines. study your subject, and be familiar with the Audubon's goals and objectives. Set up a meeting with your legislator through their assistant. Note the assistant's name and state the purpose of your visit to them. Most importantly, have a clear understanding of why you are there. Either you are there to ask for something or you are there to educate. If you haven't asked, then state it up front. Ask for 15 or 30 minutes, whatever amount of time given. Be respectful and mindful of it. Do not leave the meeting without asking your legislator, what can I do to help you propose or support legislation on water issues? I would like to help you support your bill on water legislation. When would be a good time to meet again on this topic? Write down and follow up on requests for information to your legislator. It's been a privilege and an honor to be here today, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you. Thank you, Haley, for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Senator-elect Gabaldón. So next, we will have Representative Dunn, who is the chairman of the House Land, Agriculture, and Rural Affairs Committee, as well as a member of the House Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. Representative Dunn, would you share with us your thoughts for the upcoming session as related to water and natural resource issues, plus any tips you have for effective constituent communication?
Thank you, Haley, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today and with everybody that's on this webinar. Yeah, and a little bit of background about myself. Born and raised in Yuma, Arizona. I have a farming operation and a couple of other businesses, and been lucky enough to be appointed in 2018 to the legislature and then reelected in 2018 and reelected again this year. So happy to be going back, and rural issues and agriculture and water and natural resources are very dear to my heart. And so we have a lot of commonality with the Audubon Society, and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. And so, like Senator-elect Gabaldón said, as far as engaging with the legislature, it's good to make sure that when you do come to the Capitol, to have try to set up meetings, have constituents come, so that when we meet with we meet with most everybody, but we for surely meet with everybody that's a constituent that's coming to the Capitol from our district. And so when you have people that are coming, if you meet with those legislators, and bring somebody that's from as many districts as you can, because if we got really busy schedules, and if you have someone from the district, we'll make sure we squeeze them into our schedule, because they drive all the way down to the Capitol. We're gonna make sure we meet with them, but we always meet with Haley and the group that represents the Audubon Society. So we appreciate them coming down. And I want to talk about a few things that we worked on this last session that didn't get across the finish line. One of them was House Bill 2675, was it concerning surface water rights and the use it or lose it portion of our current bill, our current statute. And so this bill would actually made it out of the House and was actually working its way well. And so this makes you, if you have water conservation and you set that plan up and you get it approved ahead of time, you can basically bank that water. You don't lose your water rights like our current law is. So I think that's something that we look forward to bringing back this next year, and hopefully with your support, we can get it signed by the governor this next year. One of the other things that I believe that will be, we did in the last session, was we finally got some funding for WARF, for the Water Quality Assurance Revolving Fund. And so that's something that's been underfunded for years. And so it's important that we get that funding in, and it's important that we continue to maintain that funding as we go forward for the environmental quality of our water quality. So that's something that I think we'll make sure that we continue to work on in the budget. One of the things that I worked on this last session, and we, like everything with COVID, it gets stopped, was HCM 2009. It'll have a new number this year, but it's floodwater harvesting study, urging Congress to fund a technological and feasibility study of the development of a diversion dam and pipeline to harvest floodwater from the Mississippi River to replenish the Colorado River and prevent flood damage along the Mississippi rivers. So this is something that they've actually had studies on, and we think that like the CAP was a pipe dream back when it was first started, and now it's it's the lifeblood of Arizona. This is something that floods in the Mississippi River floods all the time, and they actually can run it across the country to bring water. And so we're going to see if we can get the federal money to fund that study. My brother farms in Mississippi actually, and and they have hundreds of thousands of dollars every other year in preventive planning and damage to the different farmlands in Mississippi because of the flood. So this is something that just the money savings in Mississippi alone could help pay for this project. One of the other things that we're watching is the PALS program, the Protect Arizona Lakes and River and Streams program that the ADQ is funding or asking for funding. There's still some stakeholder meetings on that since the Waters of the U.S. was modified. The ADQ is wanting to do some studies on that. I'm sure you guys, we can probably talk a whole hour just talking about that situation, but it's one of the things that we're actively watching and seeing how, what they're asking for in their regulations, and but we'll be working with the ADQ and see what that looks like coming forward. One of the things that's interesting that you guys might have listened to or heard about is the pending transfer from the Cibola Refuge, or not the Cibola Refuge, but the Cibola area on the Colorado River. They've asked the federal government, petitioned the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and they approved a partial transfer of water from the Colorado River to Queen Creek. The river communities are opposed to that transfer. They feel that if once you start selling water off the river, it's going to the water will continue to be moved off the Colorado River. And right now there's the federal government is looking at whether or not they're going to do a partial environmental impact, or they're going to do a full environmental impact. And the river communities are asking for a full environmental impact study. And so this is something you guys might want to weigh in on or look into that to as you start this individual transfer is a small amount. But once you start doing this and you start moving a lot of water off the river, it will impact the flow of the river and impact the habitat of the river. So it's something that you guys might want to look into. There's no bills or no House legislation pending on that, but that's going to be in the federal, it's a federal program. So there's, there's always got a lot of water, and we're always working on the litigation, the adjudication, things that are working on. I know some of your priorities that you have with the protecting groundwater supplies and securing the Colorado River and the clean water for Arizona. Those are things that we all kind of agree upon, and we're working on the pathway forward. We might have some discussions on that, but there's things that we're definitely watching the agreement as they start looking at for the Colorado River Basin states and with Mexico by the year 2026. That agreement has to be redone, and we'll be actively watching that and participating in that. So I think I rambled on enough. We'll wait for some questions and answers, but that's kind of how I see the legislation. Some things we'll be working on. There'll be a lot more. Like I said, I'm still sitting on the Energy, Water, Natural Resources Committee, and I'm still chairman of the Ag Committee, and look forward to anybody coming down and visiting or emailing us as you guys talk about how you can engage with us. We'd love to visit and talk about things that are dear to our heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Dunn. Really appreciate that. And we will now entertain some questions. So if you have questions for your legislators today, please put them in the chat. I've seen a few come in, and I thought this was an interesting, good question. Is it better to meet with our state senator or our state representatives? What would you two say to that?
I say that you need to be with both. We all sit on different committees, and any bill has to go through both chambers. And so, it depends on if you're educating or if you're advocating for a specific bill, you need to find out where it's at in the process. And so a lot of times, it depends on timing. So if it's a Senate bill that started in the Senate and it's early on in the session, then I probably won't take some of those meetings unless you're from my district until the bills actually come over to the House, because we have so many bills we're looking at. We can't meet with everything that's going on in the Senate, the House at the same time. So you kind of need to know where the bill is in the process. And so if it's in the House side, then you need to meet with the House members, and then maybe teeing up and telling the members, your member in the Senate, that this is coming. We think it's going to get over to you, and I'd like to set up a meeting, but we only have so much time, so we try not to be working on Senate bills while we're still doing House bills.
That's a helpful tip to prioritize which you talk to. There we go. Now, Senator-elect Gabaldón, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the question, and I believe every legislator is important. But as Representative Dunn had indicated, is especially communicate with the members that are serving on that certain committee, especially the chair of that committee. There's a vice chair, and then as I'd indicated, I'm the ranking member on the Democratic caucus and the natural resources. So again, but again, all of us as legislators, we do vote on legislation. There is an opportunity for you to speak at committee meetings. There's a request to speak. There's an opportunity for you to voice your concerns, your questions, your comments. And what also I found useful over the years is when any constituent across the state of Arizona provides me information, either by dropping off some information in my legislative office or email me. I'm I can't speak for the other members of the legislature, but I guess I believe information is power. Knowledge is power. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Morgan, maybe if you can multitask, we could put Representative Dunn and Senator-elect's email addresses in the chat, though we will show everybody later how they can contact folks. So there was a good question about, and maybe both of you could speak to it, anything proposed that this coming legislative session or something that happened last session that would better protect our living rivers and streams. And I think I'm thinking of a couple examples, and Representative Dunn, you mentioned HB 2675, and then Senator-elect Gabaldón, if there's anything you would like to highlight in regards to ways to protect our rivers and streams.
Would you like me to begin? What I find is when it comes to water issues, very different. When we're talking Arizona, it's actually kind of divided into what's called active management areas, and then anything outside of the active management areas. And so when we as legislators are talking about proposed legislation, we have to keep that in mind, that there are certain guidelines and policies that affect the AMAs, and then outside. So when we're wanting to protect our rivers and streams outside of these active management areas, it's very important to continue to educate us as legislators. And so proposed legislation is I believe the best proposed legislation comes from the people of the state of Arizona.
Yeah, besides, and then I agree with that, Senator. I think besides 2675, that's going to be renumbered, and the PALS program, looking at what the waters of the U.S. has been in deregulation. There'll probably be some more talking about that, and like I said, the groundwater adjudication. That does eventually affect some of the streams, and so I think we'll just continue to look at forest health. Those are things that actually, the more we do work on forest health up north, that's going to actually end up getting more water into the rivers, streams. So those are things that I'm sure we'll be discussing coming up, but I don't have any specific legislation that I know of.
And then if I may interject, just to add one more thing to a point that Representative Dunn had indicated, is to think outside the box. He had mentioned the Central Arizona project, which was, again, as he said, a pipe dream. And so when we're looking for future supplies, water supplies and resources, we do have to think outside the box and be ready to actually talk within those 7 basin states, because we can't do it alone. But as Arizona we are leaders in doing water policy. Let's continue to do that, but we have to extend those conversations outside the state of Arizona.
Great, thank you for that. There's also a question in the chat about committees, and I am going to cover what committees deal with the issues we care about. So I won't make you necessarily answer that angle of it, but if you wanted to offer any insights that you had on committee structure changes for this coming legislative session, briefly, if there was anything of note worth noting in the various chambers, I will explain what committees that there are later, but just wanted to offer that up as the last opportunity here for a question.
In the House side, the Energy, Water, Natural Resource Committee remain the same. So all your natural resources, water issues will come through there. On my committee on Land and Agriculture, we added Rural Affairs. So if there's anything that has to do with Rural Affairs issues, actual land issues, state land department, grazing, that kind of stuff, that's kind of changed. We added that. So You'll be getting to go back and forth between both houses. And we did combine in the House a lot of committees. So there's only 13 committees instead of 18, combined like military and affairs and safety, public safety. So there's a few changes, but basically for your guys' stuff, it's pretty much the same in the House.
In regards to the Senate, what I've noticed is also they have combined committees. There are different committees, but basically it's the same committees, but we've combined some of them in the Senate.
Thank you very much. I know that there's tons more to talk about, and we'd love to talk your ear off all afternoon, but I think I'm going to move the webinar along and let you know that we really appreciate you jumping on like this, experimenting with us in this new world of Zoom, and that it's not an in-person event, but we sure are glad to see your faces and glad to keep engaging with you, and look forward to talking with you lots come January. So with that, I will just say thank you, and I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, stay healthy.
Yes, you too.
All right.
All right, so now we are going to move on to some basics. So I want to take a small step back and just remind folks about the difference between legislative districts and congressional districts. So legislative districts, or LDs for short, form the makeup of our Arizona state legislature. There are 30 LDs in total, with 2 state representatives and 1 state senator from each LD. That makes for 60 total state representatives and 30 total state senators. As for congressional districts, or CDs, there are 9 total in Arizona. There is 1 person elected from each CD to the U.S. House of Representatives. U.S. senators are elected for the entire state, and there are 2 senators in Congress per state. Next slide. So even though we just had an election and you're probably aware of this, it's a helpful reminder to know that if you're looking for your legislative district or your congressional district, there's a handy website that we will drop into the chat, and you can put in your address and it can tell you who your various representatives and senators are. But I did want to note that there is a redistricting process that is starting up, and a new independent redistricting commission will be appointed in 2021, and they will adopt new congressional and legislative districts for the state of Arizona following the 2020 census. Based on census data and the results of the process conducted by the Independent Redistricting Commission, new LDs and CDs will be created. So just when you got used to knowing what district you're in, it's going to change. All right, next slide. So to the promised election update portion of this webinar. If you haven't read it in the news, here's our brief election update. The Arizona State House of Representatives will remain in Republican control, 31 to 29. And the Arizona State Senate added a Democrat, but will remain in Republican control, 16 to 14. And just a note that each legislature lasts 2 years, and regular sessions begin the second Monday in January and generally last 100 days. Next slide. So in terms of the leadership, members of the legislature choose their chamber's leadership, and by chamber, I mean House or Senate. They select the leaders from within their respective parties. So Representative Rusty Bowers has been reelected Speaker of the House. Senator Karen Fann has been reelected President of the Senate, and Representative Reginald Boulding has been elected Minority Leader in the House, and Senator Rebecca Rios was elected Minority Leader in the Senate. So some new names on the minority side with the Democrats. Next slide. All right, so here's the promised portion where I emphasize the committees, and I wanted to dive into just how important committees are when it comes to the issues that we care about. So after a bill is introduced by a legislator, it needs to be assigned to a committee to have a chance at moving forward in the process. Not all bills that are introduced are assigned to committees. If a bill isn't assigned to a committee, it is most likely, though not always, dead. A bill can be changed or amended from its original and introduced version. Committees are where bills are sent to be what's often called heard. Having a bill be heard in committee means that members of that committee will have a meeting where they will listen to what the bill is about, hear from stakeholders who are for or against the bill, and usually vote on the bill. If a majority of the committee vote to pass the bill, the next step in the legislative process can commence. Just getting a bill heard in committee can be a very big deal. Next slide. So the committees that we tend to keep an eye on for water and natural resources issues in the State House of Representatives are the Natural Resources, Energy and Water Committee and the Land and Agriculture Committee, which is now with the Rural Affairs component. The chairman of the committee holds a lot of power and influence. They determine what bills are heard and voted on. The party in control determines the committee chairmanship. Usually, a committee meets at a set time on a specific day of the week during the legislative session. I'll also note that if any of these legislators are from your district, that can present you with a double opportunity to connect with the decision maker because you are both their constituent and you care about the issues that their committee deals with. Next slide. So for the Senate, it's kind of the same situation in that this committee is going to be where the bills related to water and natural resource issues are sent to be heard. Same deal, the party in control of the Senate chooses the chairmanships of the committees, and the chairmen determine what bills are heard. The party in control also determines who is on the committee and how many legislators from the two parties are on the committee. The committees do have both Democrats and Republicans on them. Just this week, the Senate announced that it was reworking its committees and that there will be just one committee dealing with water, land, natural resource, and energy issues, this Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee with Chairman Kerr. All right. So just a quick note that there are other committees where water and natural resources bills can be either thwarted or continue on their way. For example, the Rules Committee in both the House and the Senate can sometimes be helpful in killing bills that are deemed unconstitutional, even if passed out of its natural resources related committee. And another important thing to note is that any bills with money attached to them have to go through the Appropriations Committee. Okay, so now we're going to just briefly touch on the U.S. Congress latest numbers that we have on the U.S. congressional races. At this current time in the U.S. House of Representatives, so now we're talking Congress, it is 219 Democrats to 203 Republicans with 13 races still not determined. So far, so far there's been a net gain of 5 seats for Republicans. However, the U.S. House will remain in Democratic control. And I believe I saw on Twitter just this morning that Senator Pelosi was reelected Speaker of the House. So control of the next U.S. Senate is still up in the air while we wait for the special Senate runoff elections on January 5th in Georgia. If the Senate is tied 50-50, then Vice President-elect Harris would be the tie-breaking vote. Next slide. All right, and then this is just a reminder or a note that basically is in regards to Arizona. All of our U.S. House of Representatives incumbents held on to their seats, and that the makeup of our Arizona House congressional delegation includes 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. And I'll just pause here for a minute so you can see the various representatives. All right. So then as for the Senate, Democrat Mark Kelly won in a special election against Senator Martha McSally, who was appointed to fill the late Senator John McCain's seat. And it's, good to remember that Senator-elect Kelly will have to run again in 2 years. but this is the first time in Arizona that we will have 2 Democratic U.S. senators in 70 years. All right, I just want to briefly run through some committees in Congress where a lot of our issues touch. So an important committee for water and natural resources issues in the U.S. House of Representatives is the House Natural Resources Committee. And with the Democratic majority maintained in the House, Representative Raul Grijalva from Congressional District 3 will remain the chairman of this committee. Representative Ruben Gallego and Representative Paul Gosar also sit on that committee. So a lot of Arizona representation there. And as for the Senate, just some committees to keep an eye on are the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where a lot of the action is at for things we care about. And Senator McSally served on this committee, and she was chairman of one of its subcommittees on water and power. With her defeat, it remains to be seen which committees Senator-elect Kelly will serve on. He is looking at committees now, and he will try to position himself in the best way to handle the priorities he said he would advocate for. We would love to see our new senator on the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, given the importance of these issues to our state. Another committee that intersects with some of the uranium mining issues around the Grand Canyon is the Senate Armed Services Committee, where issues on critical minerals like uranium are discussed. So just another committee to keep an eye on. All right, you've heard enough from me. Now we are going to listen to some other conservation organizations and their policy priorities for the coming year. So first we'll start with Scott Garlad of the Arizona Wildlife Federation. Then we will hear from Liz Archuleta with HECHO, which is Hispanics Enjoying Hunting, Camping, and the Outdoors. And then followed by Nate Reese at Trout Unlimited, and I'll round out the list for Audubon. So with that, Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you have the floor.
Great, thanks Haley, and thanks for putting this on. Again, I'm Scott Garlad. I'm the Executive Director of the Arizona Wildlife Federation, and we work with Audubon and other groups on many of these conservation issues. So Haley asked if I'd talk a little bit on conservation funding. And I'll start just by saying that good conservation work really doesn't get done without dollars, without funding. And so that's why this is important. We can probably first start by patting ourselves on the back. The Great American Outdoors Act passed. President Trump signed it into law in August. And so thanks to all of you who have written letters or talked to your representatives about the importance of the Land and Water Conservation Fund or the Great American Outdoors Act. Just as a reminder, there's 2 parts to the Great American Outdoors Act. The first is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and now that is fully funded permanently at $900 million a year. That money goes towards acquisition of public lands, access to public lands for the things that we love to do, whether it's hunting or hiking or wildlife watching or camping. But it also goes towards local parks in literally every city and every county in Arizona. So it's really a great thing to have that money there and to have it permanently funded. The second big part of it was there's $20 billion that's going to be spent over the next 5 years, or over 5 years, I guess I should say, that goes towards parks and infrastructure and the backlog of work that's needed there. So if you've ever been hiking in the Grand Canyon at a time when the water pipeline was being repaired, you're very familiar with the need for us to work on infrastructure in our parks. That money also goes towards things like trailheads or the roads in our national parks, parking lots, all of the infrastructure things related to that. So it's a great thing that we've got the Great American Outdoors Act passed. There are some new challenges. The first one is figuring out where to spend this money. The Department of Interior has missed a couple deadlines where they're supposed to prioritize. And the states need to, in most cases, to use this money, need to match the funds. And so with COVID, that can be a challenge. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to work with the congressman to, in the next stimulus bill, to give the state of Arizona, along with the other states, some relief on the matching requirements. The second item I'll talk about is Recovering America's Wildlife Act. This act is aimed at keeping species off the endangered species list. And so the Arizona Game and Fish Department is chartered with managing all species, and they don't get any money from the general fund. They get their money from things like Dingell-Johnson, which is an excise tax on hunting licenses or ammo. Or they get their money from hunting licenses or the excise tax from Dingell-Johnson, which goes towards the purchase of sporting equipment and so on. The Recovering America's Wildlife Act would basically give a state like Arizona about $32 million a year so that they could work on the species that we care about that are not consumptive species, so not the species that we go out and hunt and fish for. And in some cases, it would include those species as well. So it's a great thing for Arizona. It's a lot cheaper to keep something off the endangered species list than it is to manage it once it gets on the list. And it gives the states the authority and the resourcing to manage those species better. So we think that's a really great thing. That's likely to come up again in the upcoming legislative session at the federal level. The last thing I'll talk about is at the state level, the Arizona Heritage Fund. And so a little bit of history here. This is something that used to be $10 million a year that went to things like, again, parks or historical sites across Arizona. It was passed by a ballot initiative in 1990, but then when the budget for the state was under pressure in 2008, it got pulled. So the state legislature rescinded it. And now there's been an attempt the last couple of years to reinstate it. Maybe not at the full $10 million level, but to get it going in some regard. I think it was on a good path to pass last year before COVID hit. And so we'll be working on that again this coming legislative session. We have some challenges in that one of the sponsors, it's got bipartisan support, but one of the sponsors on the Republican side is no longer in the legislature, and that was Kate Brophy-McGee. But we're encouraged, and we think that would be a great thing to work on. And then finally, I'll just say the final word on conservation funding. I did some checking. Arizona Wildlife Federation is an affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation. I did some checking with our national office. There were 8 states and 11 or 12 ballot initiatives that had to do with conservation funding, and all of them passed. So if you're looking for common ground or things that the people of the United States are not divided on, that truly are bipartisan, conservation funding seems to be one of them. Thanks, Haley.
Thanks, Scott. That's a great update. Looking forward to the Q&A. All right. Let's now have Liz Archuleta with HECHO have you talk about the priorities. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Haley, and really appreciate being part of this partnered presentation. It's wonderful to be able to share some of our priorities from HECHO. I'm Liz Archuleta. I'm the Arizona spokesperson for HECHO, Hispanics Enjoying Camping, Hunting, and the Outdoors. We are a national organization focusing on some very specific areas as well, though, the states of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, and Colorado. Our mission is to empower Hispanic leaders to engage their communities in the conservation of our public lands. We'll go to the next slide. I want to talk about 2 priorities in specific because I want to be very focused on some Arizona specific federal and state legislative priorities. So our federal priority is the protection of the Grand Canyon from uranium mining by advocating for the passage of the Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act. And I'll go into a little bit of detail on that. On the next slide, you'll see a map. This is a map of uranium mining at the Grand Canyon. Here on this map, the temporary ban on uranium mining is outlined in green. So you'll see the green outlined areas. This is a 1 million acre withdrawal of land for uranium mining. And here you can also see the locations of active uranium mining claims. They're marked with you'll see the little uranium mine icons. Thank you so much, Jeff, for pointing that out. And you can see the location of those uranium mines is the black and white symbol, but you can also see the locations of active uranium mining claims. They're marked with a yellow dot. You can see the proximity to Utah and the Grand Staircase Escalante, which the Trump administration has reduced from nearly 1.9 million acres to about 1 million acres, so almost halved it in its size, in order to free up land for uranium mining there. So what we are seeing is that there are over 2,000 uranium mining claims within 10 miles of the Grand Canyon National Park. And Horn Creek, one of the creeks at the Grand Canyon, is contaminated with uranium. We're also very concerned about the potential transportation routes that would be used if uranium mining would need to be transported. The transportation would include trucking the uranium mining through Tucson and then through Flagstaff, the largest city in Coconino County, or transporting it by rail. And there's been strong opposition regarding this type of transportation of uranium mining for years. There's a history, so just to provide a little bit of a historical context, there's a history of uranium mining and a legacy of abandoned mines. There's upwards of 500 abandoned mines at the Navajo Nation and nearly 2,000 more abandoned in and around the Grand Canyon. These abandoned mines have caused water contamination and health issues for the Navajo people. As a result, there is a temporary moratorium on making uranium mining claims, and the current administration is looking to lift that moratorium. So when you think about the Grand Canyon, I mean, what immediately comes to your mind? And let me go to the next slide. You know, I'm a native Arizona. My family's been here for 5 generations. The identity of Arizona is the Grand Canyon. It's the crown jewel. It's a national icon, and it's a tourism and outdoor recreation economy that we have here in Arizona. You know, the identity of Arizona is significantly associated with the Grand Canyon, and Arizona is economically dependent on tourism from the Grand Canyon. We know that the Grand Canyon is visited by 7 million visitors annually and directly supports the local economy, with $947 million spent by visitors in Arizona. And this was for last year in 2019. This outdoor recreation economy, the visitation to the Grand Canyon, and all of the associated businesses support a 1.2 billion with a B, a 1.2 billion local economy and 12,558 jobs in Coconino County. So again, it's the main economic driver for Arizona. The tribal and cultural significance, I mean, the Grand Canyon is home to the Havasupai tribe at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon is culturally significant to several Native American and indigenous tribes. And then lastly, I was talking a little bit earlier about the legacy of uranium mining. Historically, uranium mining has left a toxic legacy, especially felt by the Navajo Nation. Here on this map, you can see all the little red dots. These red dots represent 500 uranium mines that remain abandoned and still need to be remediated. And these are all abandoned on or near the Navajo Nation. And you know, remediation of contaminated uranium mines across northern Arizona is a public health threat and an environmental health threat, and it is a priority for the Coconino County Board of Supervisors. They've been trying to address this for quite a few years. Let's go to the next slide. Earlier, Haley was talking about Chairman Rollo Grijalva, head of the Natural Resources Committee on the House side. He introduced the Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act, and it passed the House on March 30th. Another bill was introduced by Senator Sinema on the Senate side, and these pieces of legislation would permanently protect the Grand Canyon by making the moratorium permanent. So we're really pleased that this has been introduced. However, it's not over the finish line yet. And on this, you'll see if you just press the next button here, if you just press enter, you'll see this public opinion poll. And one more, you'll see that the poll was done, and public opinion is consistently against new uranium mining claims. And while some of Arizona's leaders are in line with that public opinion, others are silent, and we really need them to speak up. We'll go to the next slide. So that's the federal priority. We'll be focusing a great deal on making sure that that bill gets passed, that we get over the finish line so that we can permanently protect the Grand Canyon, the crown jewel of Arizona. For the state, we want to advocate for a memorial to be passed by the Arizona legislature recognizing HECHO and supporting an Arizona Public Land Conservation Leadership Council. When you go to the next slide, you will see that we have a similar memorial that was introduced earlier this year by the New Mexico State Legislature. And this memorial would recognize HECHO. It would support an Arizona Public Lands Conservation Leadership Council to help elevate the vital importance of the Hispanic culture, our traditions and perspectives in strengthening and advancing the conservation of public lands and waters for future generations. So that is something we're going to be looking for some folks to champion this memorial, and we'll work on introducing that into the legislature and getting that passed. The next slide, just very quickly, 3 advocacy actions that you can take with HECHO. There's 3 that are here. You can share your Grand Canyon story and tell us why the Grand Canyon is important to you and why it should be protected from uranium mining. You can use your social media for advocacy, and you can join HECHO's digital advocacy network, the DAN, to stay informed. And here's a slide. Next slide, it tells you a little bit how you can do that. So if you want to, we invite you all to join HECHO's digital advocacy network. It's there in the chat, the link. You'll be able, once you join that, you'll be able to receive information about important issues like uranium mining at the Grand Canyon. You'll receive action alerts and opportunities to get involved with advocacy. And you'll join a great network of people who are all coordinating actions so we can make sure that we have an impact. And if we're united and we have large numbers, that's the best way to have an impact. Next slide. So here I just wanted to show you that we are on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, at HECHO Online. And we invite you to like us on our Facebook and to join us on Instagram and Twitter, and also look for us on the web. Thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to speak about HECHO and our priorities.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was great. We really appreciate that primer on all those issues. All right, I'm going to move us along to Nate Reese from Trout Unlimited to talk about Trout Unlimited's priorities this coming year.
All right, thanks, Haley, and thanks everyone for joining the call today. It's so important that people get involved and are passionate about these issues. Like Haley said, I'm Nathan Reese. I'm the Arizona coordinator for Trout Unlimited, and I'm going to be talking about public lands in Arizona today. So quick background on TU. We're a national conservation organization that works to protect important trout habitat, reconnect degraded waterways, and work to keep public lands open and accessible for all. So a little background on public lands. They're a mixture of state and federally managed lands that allows for multi-use and public access. And within even the federal government, there's portions that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service. So these agencies, they all manage the multi-use of the land. And when I say multi-use, that can range from cattle grazing, logging, mineral extraction, and of course, what we're interested in, outdoor recreation. In Arizona, we're fortunate enough to have 40 million acres of public lands. This is an incredible resource that drives our economy here. And outdoor recreation alone supports 201,000 jobs and contributes $3.63 billion in local and state taxes. So for many years, there's been a handful of state legislative members that have tried to pass legislation that would transfer federal land to the state. And we've witnessed in other states, when this happens, eventually the state will sell its land off, thus making it private and locking the gate on public access and outdoor recreation. The graph on the left there shows the amount of state land from our neighbors that's been sold off. So in the past, a few bills have made it to the governor's desk. They've made it through the House and Senate and onto the desk of the governor, but where that governor's vetoed those bills. And simply because, besides the economic reasons or the economic drivers of public land, the state can't afford to manage all this land. A fire season alone in Arizona typically costs $200 million, and that's just on a normal year. We haven't seen the stats yet for this year, but I'm sure it's much more than that. And typically, Representative Fincham is usually behind these types of bills. And each year, like Trout Unlimited and all the groups on the call, we work to find those and keep public lands, accessible. So we're not typically in the defense. In the 2019 session, with leadership from Representative Dunn and Senator Pratt, we passed the Arizona Public Lands Appreciation Day. So this bill essentially just acknowledges the great resource we have in Arizona and starting to build that messaging around, or educating people on what public lands are and how important it is to the state and what makes, the West and Arizona unique. So next slide, please. So in the 2021 session, we were predicting that the House and potentially the Senate would flip parties. But as we've learned, election results show that Republican Party will continue to be in control, both House and Senate. And this just means there's going to be an elevated risk of these bad public land bills, we like to call them, of these bills getting through committee and to a floor vote and ultimately passing. As of right now, we haven't heard any rumors of bad public lands bills, but it's still very early. We're fully expecting Representative Fincham to introduce legislation this year. During re-election, Fincham ran for the Speaker of the House position, and during this time, he collected 10 votes from other party members. Eventually, Rusty Bowers ended up beating Fincham and still remains the Speaker of the House, but it just goes to show that Fincham is gaining a lot of popularity and might have more traction this year with some of the legislation that he introduces. And it's just another reason to be ever so vigilant and be ready to take action if one of these bills is introduced to a committee or heard. Next slide, please. So what you can do and how you can get involved. And Sarah Luna will talk a little more about this, but all of the organizations on this call, we work together during the session to alert each other and alert our members of opportunities to get involved. You can feel free, you have my contact information there, to get involved with Trout Unlimited's Public Policy Committee. We're very active in state and federal legislation, access to public lands, water management, conservation. And during the session, I send weekly updates to this group and seek support from its members to either call legislative members, testify, vote online, ways that we can participate. Another way that you could get involved is Trout Unlimited, along with the Arizona Wildlife Federation and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, are working together on the 3rd annual Camo at the Capitol. This is where sportsman groups like ours set up booths on the Capitol lawn and invite legislative members down for wild game tasting. We have fly casting lessons, all sorts of informational handouts, and of course, education on the bills that we're in support of or against for that upcoming session. And lastly, at TU and Arizona Wildlife Federation, we've created the Get Outdoors Business Coalition. This is a collective group of businesses that rely on access to public lands, for their resource, for their business. The business voice holds a lot of weight with our elected official. And we also know that businesses don't often have the time to stay up to date on the latest legislation. So part of this group or this coalition is to educate the members on it of current legislation topics that could affect recreation on Arizona public lands, and of course, how they could get involved. So I'd please, if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out to nathan.reese@tu.org. My email's there on that slide. And if you're interested, if you're a business owner, joining the Get Outdoors Business Coalition, the website link is there as well.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right. I am going to talk about Audubon's priorities for the coming legislative session. And so 4 key priorities for Audubon, really related to water. We want to see some advancement on groundwater management. We want to do some clean water for Arizona, state level programming. Representative Dunn mentioned it at the top. We want to keep more water in rivers, and we want to adequately fund the departments that protect water and the environment. Next slide. So first, the advancement of groundwater management in the state of Arizona. Outside of the active management areas in this teal part that you see colored in, and the outside of the active management areas and the irrigation non-expansion areas in what we sometimes call greater or rural Arizona, groundwater is still largely unregulated. There are areas the areas outside of the AMAs make up about 80% of the state's footprint and are home to more than 1.5 million people. What this means in practice is that in most of Arizona, a landowner may initiate a new water use and pump and withdraw groundwater, even if it causes declines or dries up neighboring wells, even if the amount of water that is being withdrawn exceeds what is recharged into the aquifer, leading to depletion of long-term supplies, and even if the pumping depletes the water flowing in connected rivers, streams, and springs. We think that there need to be more options available for rural Arizona communities to manage their water. One option introduced last year by Republican Regina Cobb from Kingman would be to allow counties to form rural management areas, which could help slow groundwater extraction and protect communities. In order for local communities to plan, protect, and steward their groundwater resources for future generations, the state needs to allow more management tools to be utilized. We've written extensively on this issue, and if you would like to learn more, we're going to drop some blog links in the chat. So the next issue that Representative Dunn referred to and called the PALS program, there is a priority for us to ensure clean water for all Arizonans. On this slide, you will see just some of the waters that are no longer protected under the Clean Water Act due to the Trump administration's federal rollbacks. Audubon and others are advocating for a state-level program that safeguards the waters no longer receiving federal Clean Water Act protection. And even though an incoming Biden administration is likely to repeal the Trump-era rollbacks, it won't be immediate. So we do need a program at the state level to protect these waterways. We're going to drop a link in the chat where we would love for you to share your story about why these waterways matter to you. And if we have these stories, it can help us advocate when we go to the legislature next year to ensure that we have a program in place to protect our special waterways. So the next priority we have also mentioned at the top is basically to get this bill, HB 2675, over the finish line. It would encourage conservation for property owners like farmers, and then it would potentially, leave more water in rivers. And we think this is a common sense solution. So we want to see that one get over the finish line this coming session. And then last, just kind of, we did celebrate that there were great resources dedicated last session to some of these needs, but we recognize that in order to properly steward and protect our water and environment, we need to make sure that these departments have the resources they need. So you may see us ask for your support when it comes to a budget and making sure these departments have what they need. So now I want to make sure that we spend the last few minutes with our awesome political consultant and longtime Arizona watcher of all things politics, Sarah Luna. And she's going to take us through some of the great ways that you can advocate from your home during the upcoming legislative session and beyond for these policies that you care about. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Haley, and thank you to each of you for hanging in there with us today. Lots of information has been shared, and I'll try to work through the closing slides as quickly as I can. Just be aware that this recording in its entirety and our slides will be made available to you afterwards, should I not answer or get to some of the topics you would have liked for me to have covered. You might think that in a pandemic, engagement with the legislative process will be difficult. And granted, we don't know what the future is going to bring in terms of COVID-19 escalating consequences, much less what it all means to how the upcoming session is going to be handled. But all of the advocacy suggestions I'm going to make for you today are ways to advocate from the comfort of your own home. So let's dive in. What is advocacy? The goal of an advocate is to gain support in a certain environment to create change for the better. Of course, the environment we're talking about today is advocacy in the legislative environment. There are many forms of advocacy, and I obviously won't get into all of them, and I will just be talking about the legislative environment. Next slide, please. So a really helpful, useful, and productive advocacy tools we've been using are action alerts. It's a great way to get engaged and to advocate for sound water and natural resources legislation. Step one is to sign up with different organizations that are involved in issues that you care most about. Once you've signed up, you're going to get emails from these organizations during the legislative session to participate in action alert strategies. To the right here on the slide is an example of one of those strategies. This one was done by Audubon. It was urging senatorial support for HB 2675. In a span of just a couple of days, we had over 550 people who sent this action alert to their senators. You will get action alerts on similar topics from a number of organizations. Please respond to each, because the more actions we can get to targeted legislators, the more important that is. And we truly need as many voices and to draw as much attention to these issues as possible during the session. Next slide. These are just samples of a couple of other action alerts. They're from groups who are partners along with Audubon and what's called the Water for Arizona Coalition. With the collective action alerts that we did on measures in the legislature, we literally had thousands of messages going into our legislators, and it was noted far and wide. So again, there's strength in our collective voice. Respond to all of the requests for actions alerts where you're comfortable. Next slide. Another very useful tool for advocating with the Arizona legislature is what's called the request to speak system. It used to be that to make your feelings known on an issue in committee, you had to be physically present at the legislature. That's no longer the case. You can sign up for the request to speak system, which allows you to weigh in online. And Audubon has made this an even easier tool for you by doing the legwork for you. If you contact Audubon, then your request to sign up for the speaker system will be sent by Audubon. You will also be reminded of this early in the year when Audubon sends around information about the upcoming session. There's going to be a link. There is actually a link now in the chat box to get in touch and have Audubon sign you up for the system. Next slide, please. This is what a legislator sees when they look at people who voice their opinion through the sign-up system. It's very influential. They do look at it. And when they see numbers of people sign up to state a position on bills, it really lets them know the importance of the legislation. Next slide, please. Of course, there's good old emails. Senator-elect Gabaldón mentioned the importance of, number one, messages coming from constituents. Number two, being specific in what you're saying and what you're asking. And that holds true whether it's emails or a couple of other advocacy means that I'm going to mention shortly. But with the emails, be sure and identify yourself, identify your purpose, identify specific legislation, share any personal stories you have about why you're involved on this issue. Be courteous, say thanks, and ask for a response. What you see here is where you can go on the Arizona legislature website to easily find email addresses for your legislators. My advice is that any messages you send, you also copy their staff assistants. It's very important to have relationships with these assistants. Be courteous, polite, and always follow up with a thank you with them. This can many times make or break your access to legislators. Next slide, please. It's also very easy to go to the Arizona legislature's website, link on Senate or House. You can link through, number one, to get the email addresses of your legislators, but you can also link on what's called legislative list, which will easily give you the contact information for each assistant for all of the legislators. Next slide, please. Finally, or well, almost finally, there's plain old-fashioned phone calls. Pick up the phone and continue to call. And, you know, you'll most likely, this applies to congressional offices for sure. You're most likely going to be put to a staff member to make your case and not be put in touch with the Arizona members of Congress. That's not true at the state legislature level. You can get in to have a conversation with your legislators, identify yourself as a constituent, ask for help working on your issues, identify specific legislation, your position, provide strong and specific reasons, ask the legislator's position, and for a written response. Again, always be courteous and say thanks. And finally, next slide. The new face-to-face meetings, which are Zoom meetings now. These tools were written with face-to-face meetings in mind, but they apply to Zoom meetings as well. Some suggestions in planning for these meetings: do your homework, read the biographies, research their districts, their committee assignments, the terms they've served, their voting records, and their positions on issues. Plan your meetings. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are the better days. You'll be making an appointment through the staff. At the federal level, you're going to need to be prepared to meet with staff. Be punctual, patient, and prepared, and again, always follow up with your legislators. Finally, just the legislative process broadly. Next slide, please. There is an amazing, next slide, please, handout that was put together by the Arizona Republic. This is just a portion of that handout. There's a link in the chat box to this. I would strongly recommend you're taking a walk through that. And in closing, there are other advocacy opportunities to consider and means. Social media, of course, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I think it's really helpful to sign up for legislators' accounts and follow them to look for opportunities. You'll find out what their positions are, what meetings they have planned, the specific work they're doing, which will give you some really good insight onto how you might reach out to them. To educate the public to advocate in behalf of your issues, webinars are very great opportunities. Submission of letters to the editor and opinion pieces are excellent ways to educate the general public. And for those people who might be concerned that the general public doesn't pay attention to these, I can tell you elected officials and their staff do. So you get the opportunity to do that. I would suggest that it's a good thing to do. Community meetings, town halls, public forums, events like Nate mentioned at the Capitol are all great things. I would say that now most everything's being done virtually, but there's still good opportunities for you to look at. And with that, I will hand it back over to you, Haley. And again, thanks everyone for your attention.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. There were some really, really helpful tips in there. And I know when we were going over the preparation for this, I learned things from Sarah when we were making this PowerPoint. So I just want to conclude with the fact that we're 5 minutes over. I really appreciate people hanging on and their time. I think we knew this was going to be a meaty PowerPoint and webinar, and we really appreciate you hanging on. And with that, I think Morgan, next slide has my email, maybe, or maybe not. Okay, cool. So if there are some burning questions and you want to talk about more questions about this process, happy to have you just email me directly and we can talk through that. We will also send a follow-up email with a lot of these resources so that you have those in your pocket. I think with that, I'm going to call this webinar to a close, and apologies for not having time to have the Q&A, but we will be doing follow-up and look forward to keeping in touch with you as legislative session starts up in January, and to be seen what kind of fun twists and turns it takes, but we'll be ready, and I appreciate your time and have a great afternoon. Bye.